right? This is the place to start. I mean, we have to recognize that Mohnish Pabrai, a guy I write about at great length, who told me once he has an IQ in the 180s, said to me that Munger is a quantum leap above Warren Buffett in terms of intelligence. And if you think that Buffett is a genius, that gives you a sense of just how bright Munger is. And Munger is this extraordinary polymath who's just going around every discipline, trying to take the biggest ideas from every discipline, mental models, he calls them. And he creates this kind of lattice work of mental models from all these different areas. And so I mentioned before that these guys will take something from, say, a 19th century algebraist and say, oh yeah, I'll grab that because that'll work. And so this is precisely what Munger did. So he said, okay, there's this guy, Carl Gustav Jacobi, who in the 19th century was this algebraist, German algebraist, who said, invert, always invert. And so Munger takes this principle and he says, so how do you invert in investing and life? And so what he does is he says, well, if you want to be a great investor, you start by saying, let me figure out what would make me a terrible investor. And so you actually collect all of these examples of what he calls asininities and inanities and absurdities, all of the ways in which people blow themselves up doing stupid things. So for example, you'll find, I mean, we just had this recently, this guy, Bill Hwang, who's a multi-billionaire, I gather, who just blew himself up totally using leverage, using borrowed money. And as Buffett used to say, if, when you invest, when you're already rich and you invest borrowed money, it's kind of like marrying for money when you're already rich. It's just really dumb. And people continue to do this sort of stuff. And so Munger collects these examples of inanities and then says, okay, let me see the reason for this disaster. And then let me work backwards and say, well, let me avoid that. And so he had a friend who was a famous academic, a guy called Garrett Hardin, who was an ecologist, if I remember rightly. And he said Garrett Hardin really influenced his thinking on this. And Hardin would say, if you want to figure out how to help India, first figure out how to ruin India. And so this is a really interesting approach where basically you're solving problems backwards. And so Munger says, yeah, you want to solve problems forwards. You want to think about, how do I get to where I want to be? But you also want to solve them backwards and say, how do I avoid a catastrophe?